Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Nate. I also go by Hockey Boy Nate. And today we're going to be going over what actually could be happening in the tropics within the next week and a half. But before we get started, I'd like to take the time to ask that you all like the video, subscribe if you're new, turn on notifications, and share with others who actually might be interested in this sort of content. So with that being said, let's get straight into it. First things first, absolutely nothing is happening in the Atlantic at this moment. I mean, they had Dolly, but Dolly turned post-tropical, and furthermore, just really wasn't that as much of a threat to North America anymore. So the Eastern Pacific seems to be taking the cake right now with 2 invests and 1 tropical depression. So that's pretty interesting. Taking a look at the National Hurricane Center's 5-day outlook, and they you can kind of see you have 4 areas to watch, with 1 being tropical depression 3E over here. You also have this area to watch over here, this red gradient, this red circle with the red X in it. That actually has a high chance of forming over the next 5 days. So it's something to keep in mind with that one. But first things first, let's talk about tropical depression 3E. As of the 8 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time advisory, a 3E was found with 35 mile per hour maximum sustained winds and a pressure of 1,007 millibars, moving west at 8 miles per hour. Now, the National Hurricane Center's forecast actually says that it's going to turn into a tropical storm. So if that's the case, then Tropical Storm Boris is not out of the equation. You might actually have your B storm in the Pacific coming out within the next day or so. Now, regardless of the intensity of the system, the models don't seem to think that it's going to impact Hawaii whatsoever. You can see Hawaii up here with the Euro model actually taking it a bit further south. Same thing with the GFS. So it doesn't really seem to be that much of a threat to Hawaii. Maybe some sort of rip current risk, even though it's kind of illegal to go out there on the beach at this time. So, if you were thinking about, trying to bypass the law or something like that just to go have fun, I wouldn't, especially with the chance of rip currents from this. You definitely do not want to be caught in some of those. So let's take a look at the infrared. We can kind of see that there's a lot of thunderstorms on the southern side of this. Actually, the southwestern quadrant of this, if you were to divide it into forts, you could see that there's a lot of thunderstorms down to the southwestern quadrant. And that's mainly because this down here is really moist. There's a lot of moisture down here for thunderstorms to develop. Not as much to the top, to the north, which is the reason why there isn't as much thunderstorms. There is some sort of thunderstorm initiation, probably due to the fact that it's starting to wrap around a lot more of the moisture closer to the center of low pressure. So it might be trying to intensify. The actual satellites, the ADT, the AMSU, and the SATCON, actually says that it is 1 millibar lower at 1,006 millibars. So that could potentially show that this could possibly be trying to strengthen as the day goes on. Going on to the wind shear here, you can see these green values show favorable wind shear. The yellow is kind of half and half. It honestly depends upon what all you have to deal with. The red's definitely something that is not favorable for tropical systems. So the 20 knots is kind of the half and half. Anything above 20 knots really will just start to move thunderstorms away from the center of low pressure system. And they kind of want the thunderstorms in order to sustain and or get stronger. So if it loses its thunderstorms, then it kind of exposes its eye, if you will, and it just really decides to deteriorate from that moment on. Take a look at the sea surface temperatures. Really, it's kind of warm in and around this area. 28 is what you want in order for you to intensify as a tropical system. More or less, it's the area that you want. 27 is kind of okay. It's more or less just for sustaining storms, not really for developing them. But you got something upwards of 29 degrees Celsius here. That's 80 to 84 degrees Fahrenheit, I believe. So that is pretty warm down and around those areas. Anything that's at 80 or above 80 is what you kind of want. And so really warm temperatures. 27, as I mentioned, kind of that half and half, depending upon what you get into with those storms. But definitely in warm temperatures right now with Tropical Depression 3E. Let's take a look at the wider view. You can kind of see where in perspective to where 3E is compared to, say, Hawaii, Baja California. It's very much so in the middle of nowhere. I'm going to be completely honest with you all. So it's just more of will it indirectly impact Hawaii with rip currents and stuff like that. In my honest opinion, it probably could, but other than that, when it comes to, say, rain and crap like that, nothing really too much. So let's take a look at the other disturbance, though. This is Invest 94E, and this is the one that we're going to be watching a little bit. But 70% chance of formation over the next 5 days. It has a 60 over the next 2. So something to keep in mind that the National Hurricane Center actually has some decent confidence, some high confidence actually within the next 5 days on this one. But the models are actually kind of conflicted here. The Euro actually doesn't say that it forms at all. So that's, that's already a downside to this thing forming in general. But the other two, the UK meteorology and the GFS actually says that it actually forms. But the only issue is that they don't even agree as to where this thing goes. The GFS says that it curls out to sea. The UK Met says that it goes to Baja California. So we got to go ahead and get this out of the way. Is Baja California a threat? It very well could be. Maybe later on, the models could trend towards that way. The GFS originally said that it would go in that general vicinity towards Baja California, but now it kind of seems as if it's depleted a little bit. So honestly, I'd still watch it if you were Baja California, but doesn't seem all too likely in my honest opinion. Let's take a look at the infrared satellite. On all of that, you can definitely see, look at all these thunderstorms across the board. I mean, they're just sporadic. That's absolutely sporadic. This is what you want to see if you want tropical systems to form. All of these thunderstorms that'll start converging with each other and form some sort of low pressure system. You can't see that general spin as 3E had if you saw one to begin with. So it's more or less just a bunch of scattered storms as of this moment, but you could possibly see something form relatively soon off of all of these. Take a look at the wind shear here. You can see very favorable wind shear, 15 knots, 10 knots, 5 knots right where the actual invest is. And if it actually continues to move to the north and west, it will continue to stay in favorable shear. So, definitely something to keep in mind. If it doesn't form now, it could very well form later, and it could very well possibly intensify. Even if it forms right now, it can intensify as it continues to move on through, just due to the fact of the shear being there. But it's not just the shear. The shear is one parameter, and we also have to take a look at the sea surface temperatures. And let's just say that they are, they're crazy. They are very crazy. Across the board, you see 30 degrees Celsius with some in 31 degrees Celsius. That's just crazy. As I mentioned, 28 is what you want. So 30 degrees Celsius. Are you kidding me? That's 86 degrees Fahrenheit. That's around 86 degrees Fahrenheit. That is more than enough for it to go ahead and possibly produce. It's just very, very unstable air mass down and around those areas. Something to keep in mind. We also have Invest 92E. This one's not as much, not as good as it was before. Before it had a 10% chance of formation. I was actually making this video, and they actually updated it, and it just went to 0%, so I had to change the graphics there, but yep, 0% chance of formation. National Hurricane Center has lost all confidence in it, and in my opinion, I kind of have too. Even the models said it's going to deplete. You see these all spaghettis that are kind of gray. There are some that are blue, but the gray shows 0 knots to 20 knots, and that's just not good enough for a tropical system. It really isn't. And for infrared satellite, you can only see one thunderstorm. Everything else, it's clear. So this this is very unlikely for it to form. I do not think that this will do all too much. Invest 92E will cease to exist sooner or later. Just to show you as a reason why the thunderstorms aren't forming. There's it's kind of in that half and half. I said 27 degrees Celsius is more or less just there to sustain thunderstorms. If you don't have any thunderstorms to begin with, it's kind of hard for you to, start up. So, not really a lot going along here. It's really on that border. If it was a bit further south, that would have been a different story, but not the case here. And the wind shear, usually there would be all the moisture here, but the wind shear has literally just pushed the wind shear more or less to the west and not allowed it to filter and develop. So really one of those things where just a lot of unfavorable conditions down and around that invest. It's just not really going to work out all too well. And then we got this last disturbance. We said we had 4. Even though this is disturbance number 3 on the National Hurricane Center, we technically counted Tropical Depression 3E as there. So this is disturbance number 4 that we're going to be talking about. I honestly think that the parameters on this, the actual chance of it forming, will actually increase as time goes on. Due to the fact that we saw before, the temperatures are absolutely mental. It's just... Look at that. 30 degrees Celsius across the board. It's just... It's just a lot. It's very unstable in and around that area. If you can get some thunderstorms that can form, you definitely can get yourself a tropical system. I wouldn't even be surprised if it followed in the footsteps of 94E. If 94E literally just paved the way for it to have, just less wind shear around it, I wouldn't be surprised. I honestly would not be surprised. So let's go on to the Atlantic. We talked about the Pacific all too much, with all the chaos that's happening over there. Let's figure out why the Atlantic is what it is. Before it had it had Dolly. It had Dolly, but now Dolly is kind of extremely weak. Dolly has not done anything. It's became post-tropical, and it's not going to really be impacting North America all too much. So everything else, very quiet. Nothing happening across the board here. You can... it's not normal, or it's not what you would want out of a, Atlantic season or something like that. But we have to keep in mind, it is June. It is the end of June, about to be early July. Definitely, it's not supposed to be firing off as much as it once was. We've had 3 named storms for God's sake. So it's not all too bad, but let's figure out the reason why. And look at that. My goodness. If you guys don't know what you're looking at, allow me to explain. This shows how much dry air is in the sky. So this right here specifically, we are looking at the Saharan air mass. The dry air that has been thrown off, these plumes that have just been shooting into the Atlantic. You can already see there has been stuff that has gotten down to the south of the Greater Antilles in the Caribbean. There's even some more coming off of Cape Verde. So it's really one of those things where, this is a lot of dry air. One thing I want to keep in mind, though, something that is going to be pretty interesting, is that there was at one point a lot of dry air near the Lesser Antilles, and now not as much of dry air. There's just a little bit of gap. So, theoretically, if we go over to the next frame here, we can see there's a lot of dry air here, but there's a lot of moisture here too. This is a nice little tropical wave that could potentially do something along the line. And, maybe it could create a pocket of some sort of moisture along the line. You could definitely see something go into the Gulf, potentially start to do something. But definitely got to get that dry air out of there first, because that is definitely unfavorable for tropical systems to develop. And the reason why this stuff has gotten this far, actually, first off, let's talk about the visible satellite. Look at this. You can see on visible satellite. My goodness. That is insane. All that is hazy, boys and girls. That is extremely hazy. I actually wouldn't be surprised if some actually got to the deep south, and maybe even further. Tennessee, Arkansas, Carolinas, maybe even Virginia, maybe, depending upon if there's some sort of troughing here, it could possibly, limit it to some sort, but just really hazy, a lot of dust. It's actually quite marvelous to see it from satellite. You can actually see, where it all is, so that's pretty cool. But the reason why all this dust is here is mainly because of the wind shear. This right here is the directional wind shear. This basically pushes things to wherever the wind shear does as it please. So this includes thunderstorms. This includes dust in this case. That's the main reason here. You can kind of see how everything has just been pushed across into the Gulf, into the Caribbean, and it actually just kind of curls up. And what actually is right here, this right here is a high pressure. This is a high pressure that's sitting over Florida. It's going to be really warm, really sunny down there. You guys might see some thunderstorms later, next 3-4 days, something like that. But the nice high pressure that's building up over there, massive high pressure that's over in the Atlantic right now. So dual high pressures, trying to do Duel of the Fates or whatever from Star Wars. They're trying to fight for dominance. But, the point being here right now is that everything is kind of unfavorable at this moment. Everything is just not going right for the Atlantic to do anything tropical related. But that might change soon, and here's the reason why. You remember I was talking about how there was tropical waves and stuff like that, and those moisture could seep in. Well, the models are now starting to trend to something getting through South America and coming off as a tropical wave of its own. So this is the GFS. GFS, in my opinion, very underrated in the tropical community. I honestly think that it's one of the best forecasting models, especially long range for tropical and even severe weather. Typically, I pay attention for the wind profiles and stuff like that, the wind anomalies. I don't really pay attention to stuff when it comes to dynamics and crap like that. It's more or less just, well, thermodynamics is what I mean, but it's more or less just the wind profiles and crap like that. But the point being here is that the GFS is seeing something, and it's seeing something go into the Gulf. It continues to move on. Look at that. This is Saturday night into Sunday, July the 4th into the 5th. You could possibly see something that's heading in the general direction of Texas. So that's pretty interesting. That's something to keep in mind, definitely. But wait, it's not just the GFS. The CFS, one of the more well-known models, long-range models out there, agrees to some sort of tropical wave coming off of South America and moving into the general vicinity of the Gulf. I mean, look at this. Something is moving down and around in those areas. Now, for those of you who are asking where's the Euro and all this, the Euro is literally at the end of the model run. It's very hard for me to tell if anything is happening based off of what the Euro is saying. Especially since it doesn't really have anything, or at least I don't have anything that is available to me to show tropical stuff besides tropical tidbits. And even then, it's not really too good. The Euro is kind of limited to how much I can see. But the CFS and the GFS have been trending this tropical disturbance actually moving into the Gulf. Now, the thing about it is, when you guys, typically talk about tropical systems, you guys would like to know, where the system is going to go. All right, and the whole issue right now is that it's a little too far for me to be able to pinpoint where. The main reason of that is because if you remember the directional shear that we were talking about, it's quite fast. It could be quite fast. It could be quite slow. All the models have been trending. It could go Florida. It could go Texas. It could go across the board. It can do a loop-de-loop. Yada yada yada. Depending upon how strong that shear is where the tropical system will go. If the shear is strong, the shear is relatively strong, it'll move in the general vicinity of Texas due to the fact that it will literally carry it more towards the left rather than more or less towards, say, the Greater Antilles. But if the shear isn't as strong, then it can carry itself over towards, say, Pensacola, something like that across the board over there. So it's one of those things where a single key factor is the wind shear. Depending upon that as to where it will go. But there's others. There's other key factors that will have to go into determining this event. And one of them just so happens to be, you guessed it, the Saharan air. You guys might have been like, well, Nate, there's a bunch of dry air. How is that supposed to do anything? Well, it's the same thing as to what happens with the tropical waves. Will the shear filter out all the dry air by the time the tropical wave develops and moves off of South America? I personally think, due to the fact that the models are kind of agreeing and the shear is decently fast, around 30 knots, I think that it could possibly filter out just a bit. You might have some remnants of some dry air, stuff across the board, but honestly, you guys might see some sort of tropical wave move off of South America. So, it's just one of those things where we're going to have to continue to watch the Saharan air like everyone else has been doing. It's kind of a boring subject because it's literally looking at dust particles. You'd rather see the thunderstorms and stuff like that. But, it's one of those things where it's a natural thing of weather. And then the other thing, the other parameter that we have to watch that actually isn't what you would think. It wouldn't be what you typically think. It's the tropical system that is potentially forming in the Pacific during the same time. Here's the thing. Depending upon where that tropical system is, that will determine how strong that tropical wave will be as it heads into the Gulf. If the tropical system is further out from the coast, then it won't impede any of the moisture that's heading into the tropical wave. The tropical wave will be just fine surging into the Gulf somewhere, all right? If the Pacific system heads a bit further inland, say towards Mexico or Guatemala, then it will start to seep in some of the moisture in from the Gulf, maybe in from Belize and stuff like that, and it might start to seep out some of its energy, and it may not be as bad, as some of the models say it does. Now, to be fair, the models didn't say that it was supposed to be all too strong to begin with, but it may not be as strong as even that. So, something to keep in mind with that. Or there's option number 3, where it goes and makes landfall and surges towards the Atlantic. Now, some of the models have actually trended to saying this. I'm not joking, you all. Some of the models have actually said that it actually goes into Guatemala, it goes into Mexico, it sits there, it becomes a remnant low, and it merges with the wave. The wave goes into the Gulf, and it just does its thing. This also hasn't happened before, and it's happened this also has happened before, I should say. Pardon me. And it's happened relatively recently. Let's try May 31st, 2020. This was this year. Anybody remember Tropical Storm Amanda? Yeah, this thing formed, and it decided to go into the Atlantic. Honestly, don't know the reason why they didn't just name the storm that formed from this Tropical Storm Amanda, but yeah, it is what it is. I guess it just became a remnant before it actually went in there, so we'll see. But National Hurricane Center was pretty skeptical of this, so they issued some sort of watch just in case if Amanda actually went into the Gulf. 30% chance of formation in the next 5 days, something of the sort. That ended up becoming Tropical Storm Cristobal. And that ended up going to 60 mile per hour sustained wind gusts, 993 millibars. Once it hit the US, it was 50 mile per hour sustained wind gusts, but still, that became that thing. So the idea especially with there's already moisture in the Gulf. The idea that this Pacific tropical system can actually go into the Atlantic, or it could somehow influence a tropical wave, in my opinion, is not out of the question. So, something to keep in mind with that. Let me know your guys' thoughts in the comments down below. Something really interesting, interesting discussion topic to say the least. So yeah, the last thing I want to talk about here today, and it's something that I haven't really you know, fantasized over all too much. That is my tropical outlook. This is my official Atlantic tropical outlook. I've actually this is kind of updated a bit, so I've only adjusted one thing, and that was how many named storms that we're gonna get. So I said that we were gonna have 17 to 19 before. I upped it up by 1, 18 to 20. Hurricanes 8 to 11. Major hurricanes 4 to 6. Tace, the tropical. God, so for some reason I want to say tornado. Why do I always resort to severe weather? I honestly have no idea. But total accumulated cyclone energy index. My goodness, I am absolutely losing it, aren't I? Tells you how much sleep I haven't gotten. And I got a vacation to go to, so this is fun. But yeah, total accumulated cyclone energy index 168. I thought that was kind of fair. I didn't think all too much that I needed a super hurricane thing. There's a bunch of people that have been doing that, but I just feel it's kind of irrelevant because, major hurricanes are kind of, category 3 and above, and that does as much. It does not as much damage as category 5s, but it does damage nevertheless. So, it's not really all too serious. It's not that big of a